I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and my mom and dad was Delma Eckerty and Jim Eckerty, and they weren't together when I was born. He was in the service, so they traveled a lot, and at that time he was stationed in California. And Mom had a stillbirth, and then her second pregnancy she miscarried, and so then I was her third pregnancy, and she went to a specialist in Louisville, and so she didn't want to go to California. She wanted to stay back here because her doctor was here, and so they weren't together. I was a year old, in fact, before my dad seen me, and then he got stationed in Alaska, and he asked Mom to go with him, so we went with him to Alaska, and we were there 2.5 years. And then he got moved to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and so we moved there, and then that's where my brother was born, was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And then he got sent to Vietnam, and so when he left to go to Vietnam, Mom moved to Jeffersonville, so we lived in Jeffersonville, and I started kindergarten in Jeffersonville. And then at that time, Mom and Dad had been separated off and on through that whole time, and so he had wrote Mom and said when he come back he wanted to try to work things out, and Mom said she would do whatever. And then when he ended up coming home, he had someone with him, so, and they had a child, so Mom went ahead and filed for divorce, and I was probably about 5 years old, and that's when Mom decided she was going to move back home to English, because she grew up in English. So I had started kindergarten in Jeffersonville, and the funny thing about all that is that the birth date was different for Jeffersonville than it was English. And so when we moved to English, I finished out the year of kindergarten. Well, then, because of when my birthday fell, I had to go to kindergarten again. So my brother used to teach me, Debbie failed kindergarten, had to take it over, and which was not the case. It was just because of how my birthday fell. And I clearly remember. A lot of kids don't remember that far back, but I remember this because it was just so that the principal at the time was walking through the elementary school, and he seen me, and he goes, "You're the one that went to kindergarten last year," and I was like, no. So that embarrassed me for people to think she's going to kindergarten the second year, and so I would say, no, that wasn't me. So anyway, so then we lived in at a trailer behind my grandparents' house in English. Mom always took us to church. She always took us to church, and as far back as when we lived in Jeffersonville, I remember going to a Nazarene church there. Of course, when I was that young, I didn't realize that's what kind of church it was. And then when we moved to English, I went to English Wesleyan Church, and we went 3 times a week. Both services on Sunday, Wednesday, and back then when they had revivals, it was all week long, and we went every night. And so she always brought us up in church, always. And I can remember when we lived in that trailer, and every night she would read us the Bible, and she had bought those. She had ordered them. We were at the dentist in Salem, and they had these where you could order those story Bible, and it's a whole bunch of them. There's like 12, 15 of them, and she ordered those, and they had an order form there, and so she ordered them, and so we read through those. I don't know how many times. Every night we'd read through. We'd start at the beginning and read one chapter, and then we went through that whole series so many times, and then we'd get down in front of that couch. I can remember that, and we'd take turns having our prayer, and then Mom would pray. And as a little girl, I can remember thinking, oh, Mom's prayers are so long, I just want to go to bed. But that's how we were raised in church. And of course, my my grandma went to church too, went to the same church we did, and we had a lady in the church that babysat for us. Her name was Eileen, and when I think back, me and my brother was so ornery, so mean to her sometimes, and I feel really bad because she was such a good person. And yeah, we got a lot of whippings when we were little. And I went to English then up through 4th grade, and then in 5th and 6th grade we moved to Marengo, and I went to Marengo. Well, we moved to Marengo, and Mom worked at the bank there, and when Mom had remarried, and as a matter of fact, she remarried Brian Manship's dad. So Brian was my stepbrother for several years, and then they were married maybe 7-9 years, and then they got a divorce when I was probably a freshman in high school. So when I turned 15, I started working at the bank too, and I would work after school. I'd go and work for an hour or two, and then every Saturday, and then in the summertime, I would work every day at the bank. So I've worked ever since I was 15. And of course, after Mom and Randall got a divorce, Mom just didn't have a lot of money. So I bought a car. I paid my car payment. I bought my school clothes. I paid for my books. I paid for my lunch. And that was a big help to Mom, I know, because she just didn't have the money. And somewhere in that time, and I'm not sure how old I was, we started going to Valeene Wesleyan Church at that time, because English Wesleyan got to where they just didn't have any kids, and Valeene Wesleyan had a lot of teens and a lot of things for the teens to do. And so me and James went to Mom and said, we'd really like to go to church here, and so she moved us there. And I can remember when we went to English Wesleyan Church, and I can remember as a little girl having revivals and just the conviction there. And I still remember that as a little girl, and going to the altar and not knowing, exactly what I was doing, but I knew I needed to go. And because just that pounding in your chest, and just I can remember that. And we had really good services at Marengo too. But there come a point in time where I just kind of rebelled against it. And I didn't want to be there, and so I kind of headed down a wrong path and I did things that I know my mom, if she knew about them, would have been so disappointed. I didn't tell her, but I look back now and I think, man, God was watching out for me. But I know without a shadow of a doubt, Mom was at home praying for me every time I went out the door. So that was huge. And I know my grandma did too. But in high school, I got pregnant. I was 17 years old when I got pregnant, and the dad wasn't in the picture. And that was a life changer for me. Because another thing, when I was a kid, camp at Orleans was a huge part of my life. I have such fond memories of going to camp every year. I looked forward to it. I loved it. I met some of the best. Laura Laswell, I met her there at camp, and she ended up being one of my best friends, and we're still best friends to this day. And but when I got pregnant, we were at camp, and it was either, I can't remember for sure if it was July the 31st, I've got it wrote down somewhere, or August 1st. We were sitting in camp, and I don't know who was preaching, and I couldn't tell you what was preached, but I made the choice right then and there that I was going to raise this baby in church. I did not want to go down the path that I was headed. I was tired of that life, and I needed a change, and that was a big change in my life. And then Jamie was born, and like I said, her dad wasn't in the picture, and so she's been brought up in church her whole life, just like I was. And I don't know if you know that country song, Before I Knew Your Name, I Prayed for You. I can't even think. I meant to look that up before I came. But I told Mike one time, I said, if you ever hear that song's about you. Because I can remember when she was a little girl praying to God, God, please bring someone into my life that will love my daughter and will accept her and as his own. And Mike come into my life. He was in college out in Kansas. And then when he come home, he got a job at the bank, and that's how we met. His sister went to our church at Marengo. And so, but I had never met him until he started working there. High school, he went with a girl for like 5 years, and then they broke up when he went to college, and then when he went to college, he met somebody out there and dated her for 3 years, and she was a year behind him, and when he come home, they broke up. And he told one of his friends, he goes, the next girl I go out with, I'm gonna ask her to marry me on the first date. If she says no, I'm never taking her out again. We dated 2 weeks, and he said, asked me to marry him, and I said yes. And we'll celebrate 40, let's see what, this is 24, 41 years this year. But how he asked me to marry him was, I think Jamie needs a daddy. And so then when we got married, immediately he started the adoption procedures. We had to be married a year before the adoption would go through, but he started it. And so then after we was married a year, he adopted her. And so then, yeah, it worked out great. He went to church some when his mom and dad owned the store here in Valeene. So they didn't go to church because the store was open 7 days a week. Now, I know his mom went when she could, but like if they were having a revival, she might go once in a while. But he would go to the Bible schools, and so I know he went off and on. But he was to hear him tell it, he was a better child than I was. He was a better teenager. He never got in trouble, never lied to his parents. And I'm just like, oh, I pray our kids are like you. But yeah, that it was when we started dating. He got saved during a revival, and then we just always went to church. We got married in '83. In 1985, Mike's mom suddenly passed away at the age of 51, and that was a real shock. And not too long after that, Jack sold the store, and that was just hard. That was, because Jamie, of course, knew Nellie. I don't know if she remembers much about her because she was so young, but the boys never knew her, and I wish they could have, because she was a special lady, and she was so good. So in that 10-year period, I had Matt, and then I had Tate, and it was just a good life. We both worked at the bank at that time. I changed jobs. I don't know if it's in that time period. Eventually I went to Electricom, and Mike stayed in banking. He ended up at 2 or 3 different banks, but he stayed in banking, and we moved a couple times. Because we started out in a trailer right across from where we live at now. And then we bought a house up on the hill, up on Oak Grove Road, and lived there for a little bit. And then we wanted to be closer to town because the kids were getting involved in things. Jamie was in marching band, and so she was practicing during band season until 9 o'clock every night. And so we just thought it'd be easier to live in town. And we'd drive to Marengo to work, or when I started working at Electricom, I lived or worked right there. But we decided it'd be easier just to drive to work and then be home for the night. And so we ended up moving to town. The kids were all involved in sports. So we found ourselves going different directions, because one would have a ball game here on the same night. This one had one here. So we'd split our time and go to different ball games. Our house was because a lot of Matt's kids, or friends especially, were from here, down in Valeene. So in the summertime when they have football or basketball or whatever, they stayed at our house. So our house was a gathering place. And so I would be at work and not having a clue where my kids were at, and they'd show up at the office on their bicycles. So they'd been riding all over town, and they were into those airsoft guns at that time. And I'd come home, and those airsoft things would be everywhere in my landscaping, in my carpet. And you'd be surprised. I could still go up there through the landscaping and probably find those things. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and the kids had a lot of good friends that always hung out at the house, and so our whole life revolved around that. We still went to church, but our whole life revolved around doing things with our kids and going to their ball games and being involved. And then Matt and Liz, they ended up getting pregnant right as their senior year. I remember when Matt and Liz told us that they were expecting, and I was devastated because I wanted better for them. I didn't want them to start out struggling like that. And I was sitting at work and I was crying, and I was just, the poor girl sitting behind me was probably, oh my gosh, because I'm sure I was sobbing. And she made something that just switched in me. She made this statement. She goes, I know this is not how you planned it, but God created that child. And that was a light switch for me. And I thought, you're right. This is a blessing that God has given us. And so then there was Chloe, and then the same thing happened with Tate. And by that time, we're just like, oh, okay, we'll get through this. But it's all worked out good. But man, we've put a lot of faith and a lot of trust in God. I don't know how we would have got through it without God, on some of those like that. And Jamie, of course, Jamie went to college, and when she come back home, she was having her own struggles and just not knowing where she fit in, because we were always honest with Jamie. She knew that Mike had adopted her. We was always honest, and I didn't realize the struggle she was going through with that until later, until she's actually talked to me about it, because she felt like that she wasn't wanted. And I never had that conversation with her. This had nothing to do with you. He wasn't rejecting you. It was, we were young, and that's what, I told her, I've talked to her about it later, because she has since been in contact with her natural father, and he had told her one time, he said, I would like to tell your mom I'm sorry. And I told Jamie then, I said, he don't owe me an apology. We were young kids, and it worked out the way it was supposed to work out, and that's over with. That's in the past. But it's just, you got to have a lot of faith. You got to have a lot of trust. Man, during those times though, especially when your kids are teenagers and running around, I remember, I look back and I think, I know what my mom went through. Every time they walked out the door, I'm praying, God, please bring them back home safely. I'm wide awake until they get home. And you have to put a lot of trust in God and just learning to let go. God, they're yours. And I didn't always do that correctly. I didn't always do that right. And just a lot of praying. And then the hardest time that I can remember going through was in 2019. Mom was diagnosed with dementia. I'm not sure what year it was. So she had it quite a while. And that was hard for me, because Mom was such a faithful. And her favorite Bible verse was Romans 8:28. I know we've talked about that before in church. And I thought, how can this be for her good? For her to go through this. And that was hard, to watch her slip away. And it was hard when we finally had to make the choice to put her in a nursing home. That was hard. And then in 2019, in September, Mike woke me up, and I had been having some shoulder issues, and so I couldn't get comfortable in bed. And I had went in and was laying on the love seat in the living room, and he come in there and sit down in the recliner, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, I just can't get comfortable. He said, I just feel like there's a heaviness on my chest. And I said, let's just go to the hospital. And he was like, no, I'll be fine. And so I just kept pushing him, kept bugging him, nagging him, as he would say, nagging him. And finally he was like, okay. So we went to the hospital. Well, then they moved him to Floyd and come find out he had had a heart attack. So that was on a Friday. They scheduled him they did the catheterization. They weren't going to be able to do stents, so they had to do open heart surgery. So they scheduled that for Monday. So that was on the 16th, September 16th, 2019. And I remember Dave and of course Jack, Mike's dad, and the kids were all there, and a couple from Jamie's church, and my aunt and my brother was there. And James had got a phone call while we were there, and I didn't think much of it. He just took it down the hall. And so then they finally come out and let us know that Mike was okay, and that he'd come through the surgery fine, and that we would get to see him shortly. So then after we got to go in and see him, then James got ready to leave. And after he left, he called me, and he said, that phone call I got was from the nursing home, from the mom. At that time, mom was in hospice care, and said that was the hospice nurse, and mom's unresponsive. And so I said, I asked him, I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, I don't know. But Mom, go back a couple of days. On Wednesday, I got a call and said Mom had fell out of her wheelchair and busted her head open, but she was okay. They thought she was okay. Well, then probably an hour later, they called me back and they were taking her to the hospital because she started throwing up. And so they was afraid she had a concussion. They wanted to get her checked out. So I went to Corden, and she was in the ER, and they did x-rays. And so they come in and was starting to stitch her head up, and the ER doctor come in and said, don't touch her, she's got a broken neck. And so then they moved her to U of L. So we went to U of L, and the doctor, when they did the x-rays and stuff, he come in and he said, this break isn't a new break, it's an old break. And so he was, asking all kinds of questions, and I'm just like, I knew she had took a couple hard falls before, because I'd went to Floyd County at the ER with her, and so I don't know when that break would have happened, because they never did notice it before on the x-rays. So he told me then, he said, we can put her, he said, she's too unstable to have surgery to fix it. He goes, we could put her in a neck brace. She'll have to stay in it the rest of her life, or you can take it off of her, let her live out her days, at least in comfort. And so that's what we chose to do. So that was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I went to see her, and she was setting up, but she was sick. And then Friday that happened with Mike, and then Tuesday so I don't know if she developed a brain bleed or what happened, but then they wouldn't let me stay at the hospital Monday night, so I went to my aunt's because she lived in Jeffersonville, and I got back over at the hospital first thing Tuesday morning, and James called me again, and he said, it's just a matter of time. So then I had a dilemma. What do I do? And that's to me a huge answer from God, because when we put Mom in the nursing home, you don't know how many times I prayed, God, please don't let Mom die alone. I don't want her to be alone when she passes. And God answered that prayer. He honored that prayer. And so when James called me and told me that, I didn't know what to do. And so finally I decided I was going to go in and check on Mike. I knew Mike's dad would be there. I called Jack. I said, you're coming to the hospital today? And he said, yeah. And I said, Mom's dying. I want to be with her. And he said, go ahead. So I went in, and they had just took Mike off the vent. He was able to talk to me. So I explained to him what was going on, and he said, no, go. So then I went, and me and and James and his wife, and Dave ended up coming, and Laura, and Mom passed away that day. And I can remember a friend reaching out to me. I had so many people reaching out to me, but I can remember a friend reaching out to me and saying, Debbie, we're praying for you. And I told her, I said, I can feel those prayers. And she said, can you really? And I said, yeah. And she said, I always wondered when people would say, I can feel your prayers, how you feel them. And I said, because I've got a peace that I know there's no way it could come from any place else but God. There was just this peace that I knew Mike was okay. I knew my mom was okay, going to be better than what she had been. Because I felt like I had lost my mom slowly over the years. She wasn't my mom anymore. And Mom was a singer, and she taught Sunday school. She was a big speaker. I hadn't heard her speak a word in probably a year and a half. And it may sound crazy and it may sound harsh to people, but it was almost a relief to me to think Mom's finally home. This is what she's lived for her whole life. She's going to get to be with Grandma again. She's going to see the baby she lost. She's going to see Jesus. It was a relief to me. And, that may sound harsh to people, but I felt like I had already lost my mom. So I had already been through the grieving process with Mom. But that was a hard season. But we got through it. God got us through it. And I couldn't have done it without Him. I remember the night that after the night of Mike's surgery, everybody had left, and I was still there to go see him for the last time before I went to my aunt's. And James had already called me, so all this was going on with Mom. And I found the chapel there, and I remember going in and just crying out to God. And I just remember going in there and praying and crying, God, where are you? I need you through this. I can't do this alone. And He didn't leave me alone. He got us through it. And so Mike got out of the hospital the day of Mama's viewing. He wasn't strong enough to go, and he worried about that. How, and I said, it's okay. You just don't worry about it. You need to get home, and we'll take care of you. Don't worry about not being at Mom's viewing or funeral. She's not there anyway. Doesn't matter. So he didn't go, but anyway, we got through it. And then that fall, that we both got COVID, survived that. It was just like bam, one thing after the other. And so then in 2020, Jack had a stroke, massive stroke, and then Mom died the day before my birthday. Jack died the day after Mike's birthday in October. And then in December 2020, my dad passed away. In January of 2021, my cousin got a call that she passed away from a massive heart attack. So it was just like, Matt at one point said, Mom, your family's dropping like flies. And I said, I know, but God got us through it. He's so faithful and He's so good. And I just don't know, there's no way that we could, I don't see how people get by and get through things without God. I don't understand. I don't see. Yeah. And, he got Tate through his divorce. He got Matt and Liz through their hard times that they had. And he got Jamie through the things that she was dealing with. He's blessed us more than we deserve. And I feel like sometimes I just fail Him so much, and I come up so short. And this morning I was praying on my way to work. That's my time that I pray a lot of times when I'm on my way to work. And I just think, God, I have failed you so much. I wish I could do better. I wish I could, but it was just like, I just thought, I guess it's Satan a lot of times likes to throw up my past. And I think, oh, I wish I could have been a better person growing up. And the thought come to me, that's in your past. God's already covered that with his blood. You can't change the past. Quit looking back there. And so I'm thankful. I love him. He means the world to me. And I wish I could do better and showing him how much I do love him. And so that's my prayer for my grandkids, especially too. When they go through hard times, give God a chance. Just, I wish I could express how life-changing it is. Because before I became a Christian and to where I'm at now, I don't know that I could have got through all that without him. So I would just tell him, give him a chance. When you're at the end and nowhere to turn, there's God. You know, I don't know. I wish I could put it into words. I can remember my mom talking about that, her life before and her life after. And I've got that too, my life before, my life after. My life before, I planned on going to college, but I was kind of getting into alcohol. And I just think then, of course, when I got pregnant, that all fell apart. I just think that was God's blessing in my life, because I don't know if I would have went to school, I don't know what kind of person I would have become. I think that was God's provision, his protective hand on me. You know, I'm not saying that, you know, that he caused me to get pregnant. That was a decision on my own. That was my choice. But he used my choice. That's another thing that I have learned, is God can take our bad choices and bring about good in our lives. And that's what he's done in mine. That's what he did in my life. He took my bad choices. Yeah, I made a lot of bad choices, but he used them for good. And I'm so thankful for that.